Chapter 12. Miss Sally Entertains. As the big birds swooped down again, the Hollisters threw themselves flat on the ground. Holly was the first to rise to her knees, her hands still covering her face. "Has the bad bird gone away?" she asked, peeking between her fingers. It was nowhere in sight. And there stood Peppo, Kit, and Rita, chuckling and holding their sides. "What's so funny?" Ricky demanded, sitting up with a bewildered look. "That bird won't hurt you," Kit informed them. "We'd forgotten you hadn't met Buzzy." "That's a good name for him. He buzzed us like a dive bomber," Pete said ruefully, as he and the others rose and dusted themselves off. "That's how he got his name," Kit said. "He does that to have fun with people." "Buzzy is Miss Sally's pet crane," Rita went on. "She found him when he was a nestling and raised him. He's really very gentle." "Look, Buzzy's over there," cried Sue, pointing. The beautiful white bird was watching them from a hummock of grass not far away. "I think he's laughing at us," Pete said. "What kind of crane is he? We don't have birds like that on the lake behind our house in Shoreham." "Miss Sally calls it a whooping crane," Kit answered. "She says he certainly whoops it up early in the morning." Peppo and the Hollister children went to remove their costumes. Then they walked to the cafeteria. Ricky was fascinated by the chefs in their white caps, standing behind steam tables and serving everyone with enormous ladles and spoons. By the time the little boy reached the end of the counter, his plate was heaped high with fried chicken, biscuits, sweet potato, and corn pudding. "I sure like the food down here," he confided to Pete, whose servings had been just as generous. The girls did not take so much to eat, and once Rita saw Pam break off part of a roll and toss it under the edge of the tent. "What'd you do that for?" she asked. Pam giggled. "I saw Buzzy peeking at us," she said. Rita laughed. "I guess he's waiting to go with us." When the children started for Miss Sally's, Buzzy kept pace, sometimes strutting along on his stilt-like legs, other times flying above them. After a long walk, they came in sight of a small brown house, tucked in a grove of palm trees and flowering shrubs close to the water. "That's Miss Sally's bungalow," Kit said, pointing. "It's just like Red Riding Hood's grandmother's house in our fairy tale book," cried Sue. "Isn't it adorable?" As she spoke, a slender, white-haired woman came around a curve in the shoreline. She walked toward them from the beach, carrying 2 pails of seashells, which seemed to be very heavy. "There's Miss Sally," Rita exclaimed. "Come on, Ricky," Pete said. "Let's carry those pails for her." The 2 boys raced ahead. Seeing them approach, the woman stopped, set the pails on the sand, and brushed a wisp of hair from her eyes. She had a kind face, and the Hollisters liked her immediately. "Goodness," she exclaimed. "So many children. How nice to see you all." "Miss Sally, these are new friends of ours, the Hollisters," Rita explained, and introduced each child. "Buzzy nearly scared them out of their wits." She laughed. "Oh, that funny bird of mine," Miss Sally said as she shook hands with the Hollisters. "Please forgive him." She clucked at her pet, who was stepping around daintily. "Buzzy," she said, "your bill is so long it makes you look ferocious. You must mind your manners and not scare people like that." Buzzy hung his head, and Sue giggled. Miss Sally continued, "You see, children, Buzzy thinks of himself as a real person, not a bird. I often wonder if the other birds laugh at him." "Aren't you afraid he'll fly away?" Holly asked with great concern. "We had a parakeet once who did." "Oh, no. Whenever Buzzy flies off, he always comes back at feeding time," Miss Sally said. "I give him little treats. Buzzy often goes to join a colony of wild cranes who live about 2 miles from here, but he never stays with them long. Buzzy suddenly strutted away from the group, his head held high. Just look at that, Kit laughed. He knows we're talking about him, conceited bird. Miss Sally nodded. Come here, Buzzy, and shake hands with the Hollisters, she ordered, and don't you ever frighten them again. The crane turned back, his long legs moving like a slow-motion picture. He stopped, raised his right foot, and shook hands with Sue, Holly, Ricky, Pam, and Pete. Now we're all friends, Miss Sally said, smiling. The boys picked up the pails of shells, as she added, Won't you come and visit my little home? We'd love to, said Pam. And may we see your seashell figures? Rita told us about them. Yes, indeed, the woman answered, and led the way toward her bungalow. Entering through a rose-framed doorway, the Hollisters stepped into a sunny living room. Oh, Miss Sally, Pam exclaimed, her eyes wide with delight. How I'd love to live here. The room was very neat, and the windows overlooking the water glistened like crystal. Soft hand-hooked rugs in lovely colors lay upon the painted floor, and the comfortable furniture was covered in bright chintz patterns. I make rugs in my spare moments, Miss Sally told Pam, who was admiring them. And here, she said, winking at Rita, is my butterfly collection. Miss Sally pointed to an ebony shelf, upon which were more than 100 exquisitely colored butterflies. Why, they're not real, Ricky exclaimed. They're made of shells. You're right, the woman admitted. That isn't all, Rita told the Hollisters. Look over here. She led them to an old sea chest, which stood in a corner of the room. These are Miss Sally's birds. Poised on the chest as though ready for flight were some 50 birds fashioned from shells. Look, there's little Buzzy, Holly cried, pointing to a tiny crane with the same red topknot. Miss Sally smiled as she showed them various Florida birds she had made from shells. Ricky pointed to a pink one with extremely long legs. Is there really a bird like that? He asked. Oh, yes, indeed, the woman replied, her eyes twinkling. That's a flamingo. They had nearly disappeared from this part of the country, so Florida now has a reservation for their protection. How do you ever make these birds? Exclaimed Pam in admiration. It takes patience, my dear, Miss Sally replied, and imagination, too. You could make them with a little practice. I'd love to try, Pam said. Wouldn't you, Holly? But Holly was not in the room. She and Ricky and Sue had wandered outside to find Buzzy. The crane was not in sight. He's probably gone off to tell his bird friends how he scared us, Sue giggled. Say, I have an idea, said Ricky. What is it? Holly questioned. Follow me and I'll show you. Ricky laughed as he searched among the bushes and presently came up with 2 enormous fan-shaped palm leaves. At this point, Pam ran out to see where the others were. What are you going to do with those, Rick? She asked, as her brothers skipped toward a shed behind Miss Sally's house. I'm Buzzy, Ricky called back over his shoulder. Watch me. The girls moved closer to see what their brother was up to. Ricky held a palm leaf in each hand and stood on the shed roof, flapping his arm wings like a great bird. Realizing what he was about to do, Pam shouted, Wait, Rick, don't jump! But he paid no attention to her warning. With another flurry of his wings, Ricky swooped off the roof. There was a loud thump as the little boy landed in a heap on the ground. Oh! Screamed Sue. At first the boy lay still, gasping for breath. Pam rushed forward, fearing he might have broken his legs. But slowly Ricky pulled himself up. I'm all right, he said. I just scraped my knees. The old wings didn't work. that moment Buzzy flapped his way lazily over the treetops and landed beside the children. He stepped over to inspect Ricky's knee. Then he looked at the crumpled palm leaves lying beside the shed. "I guess Buzzy thinks I'm off my top," Ricky said, managing a smile. "He looks as if he's laughing at me." "There is a twinkle in his eye," Pam agreed. By this time, Miss Sally and the others had come outside. She insisted upon Ricky's going into the house and having his knees washed and bandaged. As she and Ricky disappeared through the doorway, Buzzy walked over to Kit and nudged him with his bill. "Buzzy wants to play a game," Kit laughed. "Watch this." The boy chose a long, smooth stick lying nearby and walked past the bird, swinging the wood like a cane. Buzzy stalked him for a moment and then made a lunge, catching the cane in his beak. He flew off with a great flutter of his wings. But presently he came back and dropped the cane almost at Kit's feet. "That's cute," said Holly. "Make him do it again." "You try it, Pete," Kit suggested, handing the stick to his friend. Pete took the cane and twirled it. Once more, Buzzy swooped down, snatched the stick, and darted off into the sky. After that, each child took a turn, including Ricky, who came out with both knees bandaged. The crane seemed to enjoy the game as much as the children did. "I wish we could take him to Shoreham and make him do tricks," Holly said. "He'd probably freeze to death," Pete told his sister. When Buzzy tired of the game, he headed off over the trees. Pam and Pete went inside the bungalow to talk with Miss Sally. She was packing a few seashell souvenirs in a box for the Hollisters to take along. "Oh, how kind of you," said Pam. "We're having such a wonderful time down here." "We sure are," Pete added. "But I hope we can solve the mystery of the dog napper before we leave." "You mean the one who took Nappy?" the old lady asked. "Yes," Pam replied. "Why do you think the poodle was stolen, Miss Sally?" "For several reasons. First, Nappy was never a roamer. Second, there was no way for him to leave the grounds without someone seeing him. Third," the woman continued, "I saw a strange man cruising about the island the day Nappy disappeared. He was acting very suspiciously, and I have a strong feeling he had something to do with it." "What exactly did the man in the boat look like?" Pete asked excitedly. The woman was thoughtful a moment. Then she said slowly, "He was a stocky fellow, with a mean, cruel face. One hand was bandaged." "Yes, go on," Pam urged. "I don't know what else to tell you about him," Miss Sally said. "There was just one other thing. It may not help you much. The man was wearing a white shirt with blue zigzag stripes."